Now, many people think of sharks as shark scientists, and this is what we do. However, it's really the glamorous side of shark science, in rooms without windows at our computers. So over the past 10 years, the IUCN Shark Specialist Group has completed the readiness assessment of all 1,041 sharks, skates, rays and chimeras at 13 workshops, and over 300 scientists, divers, conservation biologists and naturalists were involved. Now that we have assessed all shark species, we are in a unique position to start looking at how species are distributed around the world and where the most threatened species are. We've recently been working to analyse all of this information, and what I'm about to present to you is some really exciting new information on the status of sharks around the world. Now, before I tell you where the problems are, let me show you where the sharks live. Now, this map shows you how many species live in each region. So yellow is 0 to 9 species. The dark brown is 75 to 140 species. From this you can see that very few species actually live in the middle of the ocean. Most of them are concentrated along the coastline, which you can imagine causes some problems for the sharks. We can also see that most of the species live in the tropics, similar to if we compare the number of species in a forest in Britain with the number of species in a tropical rainforest in Brazil. We can also see that there are 3 main hotspots with high numbers of species, particularly in the Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific, Australia and West Africa. So how many sharks are threatened? Here we can see that nearly 20% of all sharks are in one of the threatened categories. Over 10% are near threatened, and only one quarter are currently safe from extinction. However, we've also discovered that nearly 50% of all sharks are data deficient. Out of all of the taxonomic groups that have been assessed by the IUCN Red List, this is one of the highest levels of data deficient species. Obviously, this is something that we have to look into further, because many of these species could be threatened and we just don't know it. So what is also really interesting is the data deficient species are relatively evenly spread around the globe, except there's one key hotspot in Japan and in China. So where are these threatened species located? And just to remind you, the threatened species are those that are vulnerable, endangered and critically endangered. You can see that there are a number of key hotspots of threat in the Indo-Pacific, southern Brazil and West Africa. But that begs the question, why are the threatened species concentrated in these areas? Well, what I'm now going to do is going to get out my crayons. I'm going to start drawing on this map. So, we've already highlighted the areas with lots of threatened sharks in brown. But who is catching the sharks? Indonesia, India, Spain, Taiwan and Argentina are the top 5 fishing nations in the world, with 40% of the world's catch. What is also really interesting is that Europe accounts for nearly 15% of global catch. That's a larger percentage than the global catch of the top fishing nation of Indonesia. We can now shade in all of the countries based on their share of the global shark catch. So white is 0 to 1%, black is 9 to 13% of the global catch. We can now see more clearly who is catching most of the sharks. First of all, let's look at the Indo-Pacific, one of our hotspots of threatened sharks. You can see some of the key shark fishing nations, including India and Indonesia in this region, which are obviously having a large impact on shark populations in their waters. One other hotspot of threatened sharks was in West Africa. There doesn't seem to be much shark fishing activity from the countries along that coast. But what if I told you that this is where all the Spanish and European boats have permission to fish for sharks? What's also interesting is that the US has its fair share of the global shark catch, but they also have really good, particularly good management policies in place for the protection of sharks. And now I'm going to start drawing fins on the map to represent the percentage of the total fin exports to Hong Kong in 2008. Now, these larger fins represent the top 6 countries: Spain, Singapore, Taiwan, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates and Costa Rica. But there are also many other coastal countries involved. The take-home message from the information presented on this map is that there is clearly a relationship between the proportion of shark fin exports to Hong Kong, the proportion of the global shark fin catch, and the number of threatened species surrounding an area, particularly of Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia and Spain. So for the first time we have the threat status category of all 1,041 sharks, skates, rays and chimeras. We're also beginning to understand the threats that sharks face and which countries are the drivers of these threats. So we now have an opportunity to transform fisheries management and shark conservation. So what tools are out there for us to use? Well, the IUCN Shark Specialist Group is specifically working to create species conservation strategies for the most critically endangered shark species. Now, I'll tell you more about this at the end of Alex's presentation, so as not to ruin the punchline. We can also encourage governments to sustainably manage shark finning in their waters or on their boats. There are 3 ways to manage the act of shark finning. First is to do nothing at all. The fins are removed at sea and the body is thrown overboard. The second method, and this is what the SSG actually advises as a minimum, is to allow fins to be cut off the shark as it is caught, but the weight of all fins brought back to port must be a certain percentage of the weight of all the shark bodies on the boat. The SSG recommends 5% or less. The third way, and the most conservative method to manage shark finning, is to land the shark with the fins attached. This means bringing the shark back to port with the fins on and then removing the fins at the dock. Now, this improves management of shark species by allowing for the identification of sharks, but it also reduces the number of sharks they can catch because they can only fit so many in the hold of their boat. And it ensures that the entire animal is used. CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, aims to ensure that international trade does not threaten survival. Many of you will have heard about what CITES can do for the trade of elephant tusks and rhino horns. However, we can also use CITES to protect sharks by listing those species that have a high risk of extinction due to high levels of international trade. The shark fins are to sharks what tusks and horns are to elephants and rhinos. There have been some successes. The whale shark, basking shark, great white shark, and the 7 species of sawfish are all listed on CITES because of the risk of international trade to their populations. However, repeated efforts have been made to list other species, such as hammerheads, but these have failed because certain governments don't want to stop trading these very economically important species. Many of the sharks that I've shown you today are present in the waters of many countries and cross back and forth across these boundaries. The conventional migratory species protect threatened animals that cross these international boundaries. Therefore, we can also use the red list status of a species to highlight candidates for CMS listing. However, so far, only these countries have signed on to protect sharks, and the USA is the only country in the top 20 shark fishing nations that is part of this convention. However, we did receive some exciting news today that after a lot of hard work by a dedicated team, the giant manta ray has also been added to the list of species protected by the CMS, and so we're very, very excited about that. There are also more small-scale activities that are being carried out. I'd like to introduce you to Harry the Shark. The Mascot the Shark Group, a Vancouver-based non-profit organisation whose goal is to raise awareness about the plight of sharks and to reduce consumption of sharks. Shark Truth has chosen a novel way to save sharks. As I've told you before, shark fin soup is a delicacy served at traditional Chinese weddings. So Shark Truth has decided to target these weddings. They have hosted a wedding contest over the past 2 years. The entrants have to serve an alternative to shark fin soup and find another way to educate their guests about the issue of shark finning. And the winning couple win a trip to Mexico to swim with the whale sharks. And so far they've saved between 500 and 1,000 sharks from being consumed in shark fin soup. 2011 has been the year for the shark fin sale ban. 4 states in the US, 4 cities in Canada, and a number of other countries now prohibit the possession, sale, and trade of shark fins. The IUCN Shark Specialist Group acknowledges that both the discussion and awareness that this process was promoted is important. However, there is evidence that banning the trade of a product will send it underground, as has happened with the illegal trade of elephant tusks and rhino horns, and we do suggest that further discussion of the merits of these bans is required. So to conclude, even though I've shown you some pretty depressing images and numbers, there is good news. The IUCN Shark Specialist Group is beginning to fill some of the knowledge gaps on sharks, and we will continue to do so. Public awareness of the plight of sharks is increasing. The fact that I'm giving this talk today, as well as the increase in newspaper reporting, online petitions, and educational outlets, all leads to increased understanding. And with this increased awareness and knowledge comes increased pressure on governments, which in turn leads to improvements in the policies that conserve and sustainably manage sharks. Here are just some of the examples of protections that have been put in place for sharks. This is an interesting recent article from last week that welcomed the new protections for silky sharks by the organisation that manages tuna fisheries in the Atlantic. But enough still isn't being done to protect the other threatened shark species that they catch. So I hope that I've been able to show you today that sharks are not the killing machines that folklore has led us to believe. Here the hunters have indeed become the hunted, and we have a big task ahead of us to make sure that our children and grandchildren don't grow up in a world without sharks. Now I'd like to acknowledge all of these people, and if you're interested in finding out more about what we do, we have a bunch of forms of communication, so please do contact with me. And thank you for your attention, and I would welcome any questions.